Portions of Aqua Kids have been produced with the cooperation of the National Estuarine Research Reserve System.
Welcome to our Great Lakes adventure. Over the next few months, we will be exploring Lake Erie and Lake Superior, along with their tributaries and coastal areas. We'll be highlighting the many programs, dedicated researchers, organizations, and individuals working to keep those fragile ecosystems healthy and productive. So, ready to make a difference? Building a better planet starts with you.
Aqua Kids, traveling around the world, going where we've never been before, having fun and so much more, learning from our friends of the sea, saving them is up to you and me. Aqua Kids.
Man, Drew, this shoreline isn't very nice, is it?
No, it is not, Jeremiah. You know, one of the biggest problems facing coastal Lake Erie today is shoreline degradation.
And today, we're going to learn about the causes of shoreline degradation and how we can fix it.
Well, let's go.
All right.
Jeremiah, this is Bree from the Erie Soil and Water Conservation District.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
So Bree, what's the deal with this shoreline? Why doesn't it look as nice as the others?
So a lot of people don't realize that Lake Erie does have tides, not quite like the ocean, but ours are actually wind-driven tides. And those winds are either storm-based or just from changes in prevailing winds. And all of that creates a lot of wave action. That and plus lots of boats that go around. Lake Erie is a really, really popular boating spot. And all of that wave action starts to really kind of beat at some of our shorelines, which makes a lot of people want to armor them harder.
Armor them? What do you mean by that?
Well, basically, as we've started to take a lot of the natural vegetation away from our shorelines, and they begin to erode, the most common practice is to come out and armor them by either using really large riprap stone or something called bulkheads, which are large metal steel pilings that actually get driven into the ground.
Well, it seems like in some cases you would want to armor your beach, but other places it doesn't seem like such a good idea.
That's right. As we start to modify the shoreline, what we're really losing is a lot of the natural habitat and a lot of the natural function of that shoreline. So it's really important for us to protect our investments and our properties, but it's not always the right type of approach to put a bunch of hard armoring on the shoreline. There are other ways.
So what are the other ways?
Well, I'm glad you asked, so we're going to go find out.
All right. Wow, you did this, Bree?
This is what a shoreline can look like. So believe it or not, guys, this shoreline looked very similar to the one we just looked at.
No way.
It was very eroded, and we actually had more and more concrete rubble that was on here and other types of stone. And what we needed to do was we needed to, again, make a nice gradual slope into the water and then plant it with something other than turf grass. And we chose native plants like what you guys see here.
So what did it take to put the native plants in?
Well, what we first had to do was prep the ground right. So we had to regrade the site and then add a little bit of soil because there really wasn't very good soil down here. And then what we did was we got a bunch of plugs together, which are a small little container of plants. And then we used volunteers to plant over 7,000 of them along the shoreline.
Oh, wow.
How long did it take?
It took us a couple summers to get it all finished.
Well, can we help?
Absolutely.
What is this?
So this is actually called a dibble, and it's a special planting tool that we use to plant the plugs.
Okay.
So you just stick it into the ground, and then you use it to make a nice little divot, and then it's a perfect little hole for the plug.
Look at that.
So after you plant these plants, you can just leave that mat here?
Yeah, the mat's actually really important because we put all this fresh soil down, and we don't want that soil to wash its way into the lake.
What kind of plants are these?
So this plant is actually a native warm season grass called Panicum virginicum, which is also known as switchgrass. It's not necessarily something we always find on the shoreline, but it is excellent for erosion control because its roots can actually grow down greater than 10 feet. And so they really help to hold that shore together.
All right, guys, we gotta finish this whole thing. So take the dibble, put it in the hole, make it pretty deep, stick the plant in, and push the soil around it. We have to finish this whole thing, so go quickly.
Wow, looks good, you guys. Come on, let me show you one more thing.
All right.
Ooh. Well, this is what we call a floating wetland. And essentially what it is a raft that we can actually plant a bunch of different types of plants on. And even though it seems really small, it's another way for us to kind of build more function into our near shore areas. Because as these plants start to grow, their roots are going to grow very, very deep. And it's going to give nice little niche areas for some of our fish that are native to the area. The floating wetland, the raft, actually also serves as another little stopover spot for some of our wildlife as well. So it's not uncommon to see heron eating a fish, you know, up on top of this, or even seeing a duck nesting on top.
Thank you so much, Bree. That was really cool. It's amazing to know that we don't always need to use man-made armor to fortify a shoreline because plants do the trick.
That's right.
Aqua Kids will be right back.
Now it's time for Aqua Quiz with your host, Drew Cruz.
I'm your host, Drew Cruz, and it's time to test your knowledge with another Aqua Quiz. Lake Erie has more than 22,000 square miles of wetlands. Wetlands are the link between land and water. Some common names for different types of wetlands are swamp, marsh, and bog. Do you know the primary functions of wetlands? Is it A, to provide habitat for a wide variety and number of plants and wildlife, B, to filter, clean, and store water, in other words, acting like kidneys for other ecosystems, C, collect and hold floodwaters, D, absorb wind and tidal forces, or E, all of the above? We'll have the answer right after the break. Welcome back. Have you come up with the answer to the functions of the wetlands? The answer is E, all of the above. Wetlands are some of the most productive ecosystems in the world. In northwestern Ohio, only 5% of Lake Erie's original 307,000 acres of wetlands remain, and similar patterns exist throughout the rest of the western basin of the lake. These once abundant marshes have been extensively altered or destroyed due to development. The impact of losing hundreds of thousands of acres of wetlands is substantial. Fewer fish, fewer birds, murkier water, and ultimately fewer benefits to people and nature. We'll see you next week with another Aqua Quiz. Welcome back to Aqua Kids.
We're here on Kelly's Island on Lake Erie, where we're going to be learning about the species restoration of the Lake Erie Watersnake.
Hey, I think we have some people over here who can tell us a little bit more information about him. Let's go check it out.
Let's hit them up.
All right, let's go.
Hey there, Kristen.
Hey guys,
How's it
Hey, how are
going?
you?
glad you could join us.
Thank you.
We're just about to process this female Lake Erie Watersnake.
Okay.
You came just in time.
You're
then.
here just in time. Okay, so we're gonna first run our scanner over and see if that she's an animal that we've previously tagged before. Sarah's gonna turn that on. Oh, there we go.
Cool.
So we have a reading right there. So that is her permanent identification number, or what we call her pit tag number. Sarah's gonna write that down on our data sheet. And with that, we can track and see when the last time we captured her. When we take a body measurement, we can see how much she's grown from year to year.
So, Kristen, I heard that these animals were federally threatened in the past. How did they get that way, and how are they now?
Yes, they actually were federally threatened and state endangered. They were listed in 1999.
Okay. It's a snake. So tell me, how actually is it important to this area?
Well, so interestingly, the islands themselves were actually originally described as Les Îles aux Serpentes by the first explorers that came out here, which actually means the islands of serpents. So they historically were one of the most abundant and prevalent species here, that you had this entire area being described as for snakes. But as far as biologically how important they are, they're definitely part of the Lake Erie ecosystem.
So what kind of efforts have been made in order to restore their population?
Well, with the recovery plan that we finished about 5 years after the snake was listed, we had 3 recovery criterion that addressed those original threats. We had one that dealt with population size, so we formulated several different population sizes that we needed to achieve on our 4 largest islands. We had an overall amount of habitat that needed to be protected either through direct purchase or conservation easements. And then we had to show that purposeful human persecution, or that threat by people going out and killing them, was no longer something that was significant that could affect the population.
So if I was walking along the shoreline, I might be scared to pick up any random snake. How do I know if it's venomous or not?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, you should always know the species that you might find in an area. We have no venomous species here on the islands. But as far as head characters, you would look for the shape of the pupil. So with this non-venomous water snake, you can see that her pupil is round. In venomous species, they have a elliptical shaped pupil. And they would also have the presence of pits, or these little holes in the behind the nostrils in the face of the animal. And their head shape is also a little bit different. A lot of people will say a triangular shape.
Well, if you can't get close enough to see the facial structure, is there any other way you can tell a venomous snake apart, like color?
Coloration does work a little bit. However, I would say if you're not, the best practice that I tell people is if you're not familiar with identifying snakes in general and you don't have a reason to pick it up, you should probably just leave it alone.
Yeah,
and oftentimes, when you leave an animal in its natural habitat to do whatever it is that it's going to do, you're going to get to see it do something, without disturbing it that you might not have gotten to see if you tried to pick it up. So that's really the best thing to do. We've been talking a lot about snakes. Why don't we go try to catch some?
Well, we better go catch some then. Crocky, there's a snake in these parts.
I think there's one in here.
Got her. Ah, she got me. Ow, she got me again. You're all right, you're all right.
Jeremiah, I got one.
Bring it out, bring it out, bring it out. Oh my goodness.
She's so beautiful.
And you're bleeding?
Yeah, she bit me a little bit, but that's okay.
You are one brave man. Let's put her in this bag.
All right, let's put her away.
One great success story of Lake Erie is that the Lake Erie Watersnake is back, and it bites.
That's the price of science right there.
And he is one brave man.
Kristen, thank you so much for having us out
Thanks
today.
for coming, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for your help. Badge of honor.
Aqua Kids will be right back. Welcome back to Aqua Kids.
As our Great Lakes adventure continues, we're here just outside of Toledo at Kitty Todd Nature Preserve, where we're going to find out how this one-of-a-kind environment relates to the Great Lakes. Hey, Julie, how you doing?
Hey, welcome to Kitty Todd Preserve. You guys caught me. We're just starting our soil course for the day. And today we're going to take you out on a walk to Kitty Todd Nature Preserve, a really great example of the Great Oak Openings region, which runs from just southwest of here all the way up to Wayne County near Detroit. And this area is really unique because what it is it's these remnant dunes left over from a glaciation period about 15,000 years ago of Lake Warren, which is the predecessor to Lake Erie. So out here you'll see high dune systems, wetlands, and we'll go check them out and see how those wetlands filter nutrients back to Lake Erie. You guys want to go check it out?
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's go. All right, so today what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you out to one of our parcels called the Pig Farm. And this is actually a restoration site where we converted this area from an active pig farm, removed some of that top soil that's really high in nutrients, scraped it away, and now actually what's there is some of the rare and endangered plants for all of Ohio, and it's actually one of the only locations for these plants. So I thought it would be a good idea for you guys to be able to see what's underneath the ground and get a better understanding of what drives this ecosystem. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna use this soil core to just take a look at this composition of the soil below the ground. So it's really simple. You just put your foot on the edge right here, push down. Sometimes I need to give it a good whack down, pull out, and you can see. And if you guys go ahead and touch it and run it through your fingers, it's pretty coarse grained sand.
Yeah.
And if you feel it to your touch, it's really dry. So that's something to remember in the system. Even though we don't think of Toledo, Ohio as a xeric system like a desert in the southwestern United States, there actually are prickly pear cacti here, and they grow in these really arid environments. So this is a real treat for you guys to be here this time of year. This is one of our indicator species of that oak blueberry forest that we're in and some of the sand dunes. This is flowering spurge. It's related to poinsettias. It's in the Euphorbiaceae family. And if you pull off a small leaf here, you'll actually see that the milky substance comes out just like in milkweeds. So you can see a little white dot starts appearing, and that's latex in the leaves. So as we're walking through here, you can see we're dipping down a little bit in elevation, and the community type is changing. You're seeing bracken ferns, and this yellow false indigo is in bloom. And we're headed towards the wetland and dipping down in elevation. Check it out. This is a really cool plant. This is our orange fringed orchid. This is a state threatened species in Ohio, and it's got a really interesting history here at Kitty Todd Preserve. This is a plant that was on the decline, and we as a Nature Conservancy partnered up with the University of Toledo and a native orchid grower, and we actually collected seeds and tissue culture. We propagated it off-site, and then we actually outplanted it back to this parcel. All right, so we finally made it. We're at the pig farm, and you guys can see there's this area that's exposed sand, and you actually step down off the trail into it. As we walk along here, you see there's a lot more exposed sand than where we were walking before, and the plants are diminutive in size, right? They're smaller.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that this is a palustrin sand blowout. It's part of Mesic tallgrass prairie, which is one of our wetland communities of this area. And what's characteristic about it is that it's really dry part of the year and really wet part of the year. So you have to be a really specialized plant to live here.
Yeah.
One of those specialized plants, which is cool for a lot of reasons, is this little reddish plant down here. It's really small, so you have to get down close to look at it. It's called Spatula elite sundew, and it's actually a carnivorous plant. Wow. And this plant wasn't here before we did the restoration work. So remember I told you this was a pig farm.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of nitrogen, high nutrients. We scraped off the soil, and what came up were some of our rarest plants. So we have the sundew here, and there's also a lycopodium not too far from here that we can take a look at too. So here it is up close, our lycopodium. It's a really great indicator species of this environment, and it's one of the ancient plants if you look evolutionarily. Next to it, you've got some of our true moss species, and if you guys kneel down, you guys can take a close look at them. This is our pressed club moss, and it's another one of those state-threatened species that came in after we did the restoration work on its own. All right, so remember when we did the soil core on the dune,
Yeah.
it was completely dry, full sand, and the soil composition here actually might not be that different. It's still gonna look really sandy. But down at the bottom there, you can see where it changes color. There's actually moisture there if you guys take a touch. That's a good example of how that perched water table is closer to the surface here and allows these wetland species to persist.
We just came back from Kitty Todd, which is a dry prairie. Now we're here at Irwin Prairie, a wet prairie, where just a few feet of elevation can make a huge difference. Let's go meet up with Ryan and see how this relates to Lake Erie. How's it going, Ryan?
Hi, Drew.
Good to see you.
Hi.
Hey.
How are you doing?
So we just came from Kitty Todd, and these prairies look a lot different. It's only 5 minutes away. What's the difference between these two?
This Irwin Prairie is just a couple feet lower in elevation, so this area stays wetter, and consequently, the vegetation is actually much different than the dry prairie over at Kitty Todd.
Now, I can see that it's pretty dry right now, but will it ever get completely submerged here?
Absolutely. If we were here in April, early May, there would be a foot of water right off the boardwalk here where we're at now. It's pretty interesting. If you're here at the right time of the year, you'll actually see fish swimming around in the wet prairie. In particular, one very interesting species, the northern pike, actually comes up the ditches, through the rivers, out of Lake Erie, all the way from Lake Erie into these wetlands to breed.
So the term wet prairie kind of seems like an oxymoron. Are these common?
This type of wet prairie, called a twig rush wiregrass wet prairie, is globally rare. There's very few in the world just like this prairie. It's very unique with lots of unique species.
So how important is this habitat to Lake Erie?
Well, it is a wetland, and you gotta think all wetlands are important to the health of Lake Erie. Any water, rain that flows here, it's filtered by these wetland plants. You know, there's virtually no pollutants coming off this land, and actually is filtering some of those out from the local landscape, making that water healthier.
Thank you very much, Ryan.
Thank you, Drew.
So now that we've seen that wet prairies and dry prairies, while very different in properties, still are extremely important to the health of Lake Erie.
Aqua Kids will be right back.
I'm Jeremiah, and this is Earth Edition. Isn't it great to be on a winning team, or to get a good grade on a project you did with your classmates? Working together is a good way to accomplish something, and nature works that way too. Each living thing is like a team member, having a role to play in nature's balance. All living things depend on each other for a food supply and somewhere to live. That's why there are efforts to save endangered species from becoming extinct. Like the water snakes on Lake Erie, efforts to save them have worked and their numbers have made a comeback, so they're no longer considered endangered. Their place in the ecosystem has been restored. Shoreline restoration projects like those along the Great Lakes are protecting many plants and animals, and water quality improvements help all aquatic life, as well as the surrounding areas that depend on it. As humans, we're a part of nature's team, so be a winner and do your part to keep it green and blue by finding out what you can do to make a difference.
Welcome back to Aqua Kids. That's all the time we have left for today's episode of Aqua Kids. It's amazing what the Old Woman Creek Research Reserve and their partners are doing to help keep this planet green and blue. We'll see you next week as our Great Lakes adventure continues on Aqua Kids.